Tents were collapsing. People were screaming. A massive splash erupted as 2 tons of angry, territorial muscle burst from the pond, jaws wide enough to crush a steel drum. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the so-called HOA retreat turn into a survival show in real time. They thought they could invade my land for their little camping weekend without permission. They thought wrong. Have you ever seen what happens when arrogance meets a hippo's bad mood? I never thought the day would come when I'd have to defend my home, my land, my peace against a parade of golf carts, camper vans, and clueless suburbanites. But that day hadn't come yet. Back then, it was just me, my open fields, and the stillness of a place so private you could hear the wind shifting the grass a half-mile away. My property stretched over 120 acres of untamed countryside, tucked just beyond the official reach of the Willow Creek HOA, a detail I valued more than gold. I had moved here after 15 years in a city that ground people down to nervous wrecks, every square foot monitored, judged, and restricted by busybodies with nothing better to do. Here, past the tree line and down a narrow dirt road that barely registered on Google Maps, I found my freedom. No nosy neighbors measuring fence heights, no color-coded lawn inspections, no petty fines tucked under my windshield wipers for daring to park a pickup truck in my own driveway. Just the land, the sky, and the slow, steady rhythms of a life I built with my own 2 hands. A life few people knew about, and even fewer were allowed to see. My house, a modest 2-story built from reclaimed timber and stone, sat nestled beside a pond so large and deep it was classified as a private lake by county records. Wild grass waved in the breeze, tall oaks provided generous shade, and a sturdy wooden fence outlined the main living areas, leaving the majority of the property untouched and wild. Visitors were rare, by design. There were warning signs posted at every conceivable entry point: private property, no trespassing, livestock at large, dangerous animals, each one legally compliant, unmistakably clear, and absolutely serious. Most people assumed I kept cattle or maybe a few ornery bulls. Nobody guessed the truth unless they were invited past the main gate and briefed properly. Because past the pasture and the line of weeping willows that guarded the far side of the pond, hidden in plain sight, lived my real security system. 4 adult hippopotamuses, 2 males and 2 females, each the size of a small car and twice as dangerous. I'd raised them legally, under strict permits and biannual inspections, acquired after years of paperwork, legal battles, and quiet bribes to an assortment of bureaucratic red tape artists who made keeping exotic animals a modern form of gladiator combat. But I did it. I earned it. And in return, I protected it the way you protect something that defines the only real freedom left in this world. My hippos were not for show, not for sale, and definitely not for the faint of heart. I kept them fenced, well-fed, and content, but they were still wild in the most fundamental ways, territorial to the bone, and strong enough to snap a grown man in half without meaning to. They weren't pets. They weren't zoo animals. They were the final living testament to the fact that not everything had been domesticated. And they trusted me, and only me. I kept it quiet, even from the neighboring properties. I didn't need HOA gossips clutching their pearls, or city folk panicking at the thought of a dangerous animal living nearby. The nearest neighbors were over a mile away anyway, their cookie-cutter houses lined up like doll houses on streets, with names like Maple Grove Lane and Willow Bend Circle. New developments had been creeping closer in recent years, but my land remained sovereign, its edges marked not just by fences and signs, but by the unmistakable aura of someone who would fight harder than hell to keep it that way. Life moved slowly here. Mornings were coffee on the porch. Evenings were the low grunts and splashes from the pond as my hippos settled in for the night. I fixed my fences, tended my small garden, maintained the barns and the few outbuildings left over from when the land had been a working farm decades ago. The county knew better than to bother me. I paid my taxes on time. I attended the minimal mandatory meetings when I had to, nodding politely while the HOA types droned on about lawn heights and mailbox standards, knowing full well none of it applied to me. I wasn't part of their world. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. I was free, until small cracks began to appear in that peace, so subtle at first that I almost ignored them. It started with a couple of flyers tucked into my mailbox. Cheap, glossy things advertising Willow Creek's annual HOA campout weekend, building community together. I tossed them into the fire pit without a second thought. I wasn't part of the HOA, and they knew it. Their events were none of my concern. A week later, another flyer arrived. This one slipped under the windshield wiper of my truck while I was in town buying feed. Volunteer your space for Willow Creek's biggest outdoor adventure yet. It read in cheerful, oversized font, complete with smiling cartoon tents and a suspiciously vague map showing plenty of natural open land nearby. I frowned at that one but still didn't act. Just more clueless suburban propaganda. I knew the law, and I knew my property rights. They couldn't force me to join their games. Still, the persistence nagged at me. Then came the emails. At first, they filtered into my junk folder. Bland, polite invitations from the Willow Creek Social Committee, asking for resident contributions to our upcoming community event. I ignored them. Then the tone shifted. We'd love to hear from all residents with outdoor space suitable for camping, one said. Let's make this event inclusive and special. Another chirped. I didn't respond. I didn't even open most of them. I had better things to do, like fortifying the new section of fence where one of the younger hippos, a 2-year-old male named Gideon, had started testing the boundaries with all the stubbornness of an unruly teenager. I wasn't worried. I had my posted warnings. I had my legal documents. And besides, no one would be stupid enough to trespass on private land without permission, especially not a bunch of clipboard warriors from the HOA who practically lived for rules and regulations. Still, there was a pressure building in the air that I couldn't quite explain, like the humid thickness before a thunderstorm, when you know something's coming but you can't see it yet. I chalked it up to paranoia, shook it off like a dog shaking rainwater from its coat. I went about my business, fixed a loose hinge on the south gate, replaced a few feed bins, repainted the weather-worn, dangerous animals on premises signs at every entryway, making sure they were fresh, clear, and impossible to ignore. The hippos lazed in the pond, content and oblivious, their massive eyes blinking lazily above the waterline like ancient gods, judging a world they no longer cared to understand. I stood by the fence line one evening as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long golden shadows across the pasture. I watched them surface, grunt, and sink back under, peaceful and slow, and I felt a fierce surge of protectiveness tighten my chest. Whatever was brewing, whatever storm the outside world was preparing to unleash, they didn't know. They trusted me to keep them safe. They trusted me to guard this little kingdom carved out of a world gone soft and stupid. And I would. I had no idea then how soon that oath would be tested. No idea that in just a few short days, the thin membrane between my peace and their chaos would tear wide open, and everything I'd built would be trampled by the arrogance of people who thought they could lay claim to land they didn't even understand. No idea that the flyers, the emails, the polite invitations were just the opening moves in a game they were too ignorant to realize they'd already lost. I stayed out on the porch that night long after the last light faded, listening to the hippos grunting softly in the dark, a sound older than memory, a sound that promised violence if disturbed. I took a slow breath, letting the heavy, humid air settle into my lungs. Change was coming. I could feel it, cold and certain. And when it came, I wouldn't need fences or flyers or town hall meetings to protect what was mine. I had something older, something wilder, something that didn't negotiate. I had the land. I had the law. And I had 4 very large, very territorial reasons for anyone who forgot what the words private property really meant. I woke up that Saturday morning to the rumble of tires crunching gravel and the distinct, unwelcome sound of human voices carrying on the breeze, loud and oblivious in the way only a certain kind of suburbanite can be. For a split second, still half tangled in sleep, I thought maybe it was a dream. Then the sound of a horn blaring twice snapped me into full consciousness. I threw on a pair of jeans and boots, grabbed my hat off the hook by the door, and stepped onto the porch. What I saw made me freeze. A long, snaking line of vehicles clogged my private road, stretching all the way back to the tree line. SUVs gleaming in the sun, battered campers belching fumes, trucks overloaded with coolers, tents, and collapsible chairs. Families were already spilling out onto the grass, stretching, laughing, tossing footballs to kids who sprinted recklessly across my pasture like it was a public park. I counted quickly. There had to be at least 50 people, maybe more, with more vehicles pulling in every minute. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the invasion of my peace, my stomach knotting tighter with every second. Then, like a horror movie villain stepping onto center stage, I saw her, Karen, HOA president, clipboard queen, and bane of rational existence. She strutted down the center of the road in her khaki capris and designer sunglasses, a bright pink lanyard bouncing against her chest that read Event Organizer. Her blonde bob gleamed under the morning sun like a battle helmet. She was smiling like she had just won a prize, waving her arms to direct traffic as if she were a general marshalling her troops. Rage crawled up the back of my neck, hot and sharp, but I kept it buried as I stalked across the yard toward her. She spotted me approaching and actually had the gall to wave cheerfully. "Good morning," she chirped, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Looks like we're getting a wonderful turnout, don't you think?" I stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she couldn't pretend not to hear the steel in my voice. "Karen, what the hell is going on here?" Her smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something behind her sunglasses. Dismissal, maybe, or just pure arrogance. "Oh, don't worry, Mr. Off the Grid," she said sweetly. "This is the Willow Creek Annual Camping Retreat. Building community spirit. Bringing neighbors together. It's all in the flyers we sent out." She gestured broadly as if that somehow explained why there were 50 strangers trampling my land without permission. I didn't budge. "You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. This is private property. Get them off it," she laughed, a light tinkle that grated against my nerves worse than a rusty gate hinge. "Oh, don't be such a curmudgeon. It's just for the weekend. And besides," she added with a conspiratorial wink, "your land is so big and undeveloped, we figured there was implied consent. You know, community needs and all." Implied consent. My hands balled into fists at my sides. I fought the urge to shout, to grab her clipboard and snap it in half. Instead, I forced my voice into something low and dangerous. "There is no implied consent on private land. Not here, not anywhere. You and all of them need to leave. Now." Karen tilted her head, her smile tightening just slightly, the way a snake coils before it strikes. "You're not technically part of the HOA, but your land falls within the extended community boundary outlined in our charter. It's for the good of everyone. Don't you want to be a good neighbor?" Before I could respond, a minivan swerved onto my pasture, the wheels kicking up clouds of dust, and 3 kids tumbled out, already shrieking at the top of their lungs. A man in a golf shirt unloaded a gas-powered generator and started dragging it toward the pond. My pond. My pulse pounded against my temples. "This is trespassing," I said flatly. "It's illegal." Karen's smile slipped for just a second. Then she shrugged, as if my words were no more significant than a fly buzzing around her head. "Relax. It's just a few tents, a little bonfire fun. We'll be out of your hair by Sunday afternoon. It's practically a community service you're doing here, letting us use this space." She spun on her heel and marched away before I could get another word in, her clipboard already raised to start bossing around the next wave of arrivals. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. 50 people, and counting, setting up tents, hauling out coolers, unfurling collapsible canopies and setting up grills right on my pasture. Someone was stringing up fairy lights between 2 of my oak trees. A group of teenagers had already claimed a flat spot near the pond's edge and were pounding tent stakes into the earth like they were staking a claim on the Wild West. A fat man in cargo shorts dumped a bag of trash on the grass, shrugged, and went back to unloading beer coolers. My driveway, my only way in and out, was completely blocked by a haphazard line of cars parked bumper to bumper, some half on the gravel, some digging deep ruts into the grass. I marched back toward the house, trying to think. Legal routes were clear: trespassing charges, sheriff's department, maybe even civil suits. But I knew better than to believe the sheriff would swoop in guns blazing. Karen and her HOA cronies had their sticky fingers in every pie, from the planning board to the sheriff's re-election committee. This wasn't going to be handled with a polite phone call. I needed to be patient, strategic. And in the meantime, the invaders just kept spreading like a disease. They dragged lounge chairs to the pond's edge. They unpacked boom boxes. They started lighting charcoal grills under my trees, ignoring the "no open flame" signs I had posted years ago. I spotted one guy tossing a football back and forth with his son directly under a freshly painted "Dangerous Wildlife" sign, the bold black lettering practically glowing in the sunlight. He laughed as he caught the ball, pointed at the sign, and called out, "Hey, wonder if there's a gator out here or something." His buddies guffawed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. The signs weren't for show. They weren't cute warnings. They were legal disclosures, mandated by the county because of the hippos. Because my pond wasn't just water and frogs and ducks. It was a time bomb, with 4 angry 2-ton beasts sitting under the surface, ready to detonate at the slightest provocation. I leaned against a fence post, breathing slow and steady, watching them laugh, watching them trample what they didn't understand, oblivious to the fact that they were camped on the very edge of something wild and ancient and utterly merciless. And they were poking it with a stick. They just didn't know it yet. Not yet, but they would. By late afternoon, the invasion had mutated from a chaotic arrival into a full-blown siege. The soft, steady peace that had ruled this land for decades was smothered under the weight of folding chairs, beer cans, and screeching pop music blasting from a set of portable speakers someone had hauled in like it was a spring break party. The bonfires came next. Despite the clear, freshly posted "no open flames" signs nailed to every oak and fence post within sight, despite the dry, crackling grass that hadn't seen rain in weeks, they dug fire pits into my soil and fed them with broken branches and whatever scrap wood they could find. The smoke drifted lazily across my fields, staining the sky a dirty gray and carrying the sickly sweet stench of cheap hot dogs and lighter fluid into every corner of my property. Kids, packs of them, untamed and unsupervised, ran wild across the fields, shrieking with laughter as they tore up the young saplings I'd planted the previous spring, snapping them like twigs under their muddy sneakers. A couple of boys stripped down to their underwear and sprinted toward the pond, cannonballing into the water with reckless abandon, splashing and shouting loud enough to wake the dead. They waded waist-deep, throwing sticks and rocks and trash into the pond, oblivious to the quiet, deadly shapes lurking just beneath the surface. Nearby, a group of teenagers had dragged a battered ATV out of the back of someone's truck and were now taking turns tearing up my pasture, carving deep, muddy ruts into the earth that would take months to repair, if they could be repaired at all. Beer cans littered the field like some kind of deranged scavenger hunt, each one crunched flat and tossed aside as if the ground itself was their garbage bin. Adults stood around laughing, beers in hand, oblivious or just uncaring as their children defiled everything they touched. A middle-aged man in cargo shorts unzipped right there by my fence and relieved himself onto the base of a dogwood tree I had spent 3 years nursing back from disease. I felt something in my chest snap when I saw it, brittle and final. I headed toward the porch to try, once again, to reclaim even a sliver of order, and found Karen already standing there, holding court. She stood at the top of my steps, one foot arrogantly planted on my porch swing, addressing a half circle of folding chairs she'd arranged right there on my boards. Her clipboard was gone, replaced by a wine glass, and her voice rang out, syrupy and loud. "This," she said grandly, gesturing at my house like it was a hotel she owned, This is what community looks like. When we come together, we turn forgotten spaces into memories, into joy. The crowd clapped, whistled, and whooped like she had just delivered the Gettysburg Address. I stood at the base of the steps, fists clenched so tight the nails bit into my palms. "Karen," I said, voice sharp and carrying over the noise, "you need to get off my porch now." She turned, laughing, a dramatic roll of her eyes drawing more chuckles from her drunken audience. "Oh, lighten up, Mr. Private Property. It's not like we're hurting anything. You've got so much land. What's a little neighborly fun, My teeth ground together so hard I could feel it in my jaw. "You're trespassing. You're damaging my property. You're ignoring every posted warning. You need to leave before someone gets hurt." Karen's smile thinned, becoming sharp at the edges. She stepped down one stair, swirling the wine in her glass like a villain in a soap opera. "Technically," she said, drawing the word out like a taunt, "this falls under the HOA's extended use clause. Any undeveloped land within the greater Willow Creek perimeter can be utilized for community activities in the absence of designated park space. We're within our rights." "No, you're not," I said, my voice dropping into something low and steady. "My land isn't part of Willow Creek. It's private. And the pond," I pointed at the brown, sluggish water reflecting the sunset like molten glass, "isn't just for looks. There are dangerous animals in there." "You've ignored every warning posted." Karen's smile returned, wider, smugger. "Oh, please. Dangerous animals?" she said, laughing and throwing an arm around one of the teenagers standing nearby. "What? You've got a goldfish with an attitude problem?" More laughter. It rippled out across the gathered campers, emboldening them. They were drunk on more than beer. They were drunk on herd mentality, on the kind of false security that only comes when you think the world's rules don't apply to you. That was when it happened. One of the campers, a man in his 20s with a beer gut and a backward baseball cap, ambled up to the pond's edge holding a handful of rocks. He turned and shouted, "Hey, y'all, watch this!" He chucked the first stone as hard as he could into the pond, sending up a big splash. The second rock sailed through the air and plunked down about 20 feet further out. He laughed and turned to the crowd for applause. "Maybe we'll wake up the swamp monsters," he hollered. Another rock sailed through the air. Then another. The splashes rippled across the surface of the pond, wide circles disturbing the calm, the grunts and low rumbles from beneath the water, growing just audible if you knew what to listen for. I knew. I heard it. I felt it in my bones. The hippos were stirring, territorial instincts snapping awake inside them, rage bubbling just beneath the surface like a pressure cooker ready to blow. I stepped forward, raised my voice above the laughter and the music and the idiot bravado. "Stop throwing rocks," I bellowed. "You are in danger. This isn't a park. This is a live animal habitat." But it was like shouting at a hurricane. No one heard me. No one cared. Karen stood there with her wineglass raised high in some mock toast, her laughter slicing through the air sharper than any knife. More kids rushed the water's edge, dipping their toes in, squealing at how cold it was, daring each other to swim out to the floating dock I had built years ago and abandoned once the hippos matured. A drunk man, with a giant gut and a sunburn across his bald head, shouted something about skinny dipping. Another ATV roared to life and raced past me, kicking up gravel and nearly sideswiping one of the younger kids who darted across the yard in a game of tag. I watched it all, every disrespectful act, every oblivious laugh, every arrogant sneer aimed my way, and I realized something cold and clear in that moment. They weren't going to listen. Not to warnings. Not to laws. Not even to common sense. They didn't think consequences applied to them. They thought the rules, the land, the water, even the animals were there for their entertainment. They thought their numbers made them untouchable. They thought a man alone, a man who valued peace over spectacle, could be pushed aside like an inconvenient obstacle. They had no idea what they had walked into. But they were about to find out. I turned away from the chaos and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the barn, each step heavy with the kind of calm that only comes before something breaks beyond repair. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I didn't plead or threaten. I simply retreated, letting the weight of inevitability settle on my shoulders like an old, familiar coat. The barn stood at the edge of the main clearing, weathered and stoic, a silent witness to every fight for survival that had ever taken place on this land. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the cool dimness inside. The tools hung neatly on the walls, feed bags lined up like soldiers. Everything in its place, exactly as it should be, exactly as I had built it. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the smell of hay, dust, and oil, letting the noise of the encampment fade into a dull roar behind me. I needed to center myself, to remember what I was dealing with, to prepare not for a fight, but for the inevitable collision between arrogance and reality. Hippos aren't what most people think they are. They're not the cuddly cartoon versions stamped on children's toys or the funny dancers in animated movies. They are ancient, brutal, and among the most dangerous creatures on Earth. Fully grown, an adult hippo weighs between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. They can run faster than a man in short bursts, reaching speeds up to 30 miles per hour on land. Their jaws can crush bone as easily as snapping a twig, delivering a bite force that rivals any apex predator. In the water, they are silent, swift, and lethal, moving beneath the surface with an elegance that belies their size. They don't roar warnings like lions. They don't rattle tails like rattlesnakes. When a hippo feels its territory is threatened, it doesn't posture or negotiate. It attacks, instinctively, without hesitation, without mercy. And my pond was home to 4 of them. Solomon, the oldest male, a towering beast with a scarred hide and a patience that only made his rage more terrifying when provoked. Miriam, the matriarch, whose massive frame disguised a brutal cunning sharpened by years of surviving and thriving. Then Gideon and Ruth, the younger pair, not quite full-grown but no less dangerous, their bloodlines pure, their instincts unsoftened by domestication. I had raised them since they were calves, bottle-fed them under the cautious supervision of wildlife experts, invested years into building the kind of trust most people couldn't fathom. But even I never forgot what they were. I didn't control them. I respected them. I coexisted with them. And they tolerated me, because I never crossed the line between familiarity and foolishness. The pond was their world, their sanctuary, their hunting ground if they chose it to be. And tonight, whether these fools realized it or not, they were going to trespass into that world. As I leaned against the barn wall, listening to the distant thump of bass and the shrill laughter echoing across the fields, the plan revealed itself without effort. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to do anything but wait. They would bring the reckoning upon themselves. I heard the first whispers of it just after sunset, when the orange sky bled into purple and the bonfire flames licked higher, fueled by beer, bravado, and sheer stupidity. Karen, emboldened by the mindless cheers of her flock, stood once again on my porch and announced, "At midnight, we're doing the Willow Creek Moonlight Swim Challenge." Cheers erupted, drunken and sloppy. She clinked wine glasses with the nearest soccer mom in yoga pants and shouted, "Who's brave enough to swim out to the dock under the full moon?" More cheers. Someone started chanting, "Swim, swim, swim." A handful of teenagers raced to the pond's edge, splashing knee-deep into the water, laughing hysterically as they stumbled and fell, oblivious to the fact that even now, in the gathering darkness, pairs of massive, ancient eyes were watching them from just beneath the surface. I pushed off from the barn wall and walked back toward the house, keeping to the shadows. I didn't interfere. I didn't scream or plead or call the sheriff. I'd done all I could. The property was posted. Signs at every entrance, every pathway, every inch of the perimeter. Private property, no trespassing. Dangerous wildlife, no swimming, no camping, no trespassing. Beyond this point, you assume all risks. The language had been reviewed and approved by both the county and my lawyer, airtight and indisputable. I had notified the county years ago when I acquired the Hippos, and they had signed off on the setup, provided I maintained the fencing, posted proper signage, and submitted to biannual inspections. Everything was in compliance. Everything was legally documented. I had fulfilled every obligation the law demanded. The rest was on them. I sat down on the steps of the porch, arms folded across my chest, watching the mayhem unfold in the dying light. The bonfire crackled, embers spinning into the sky like angry fireflies. Beer-fueled chants grew louder, sloppier. Karen paraded around with a plastic tiara someone had shoved onto her head, holding court like a drunk prom queen, oblivious to the tightening grip of reality creeping in from the water's edge. The hippos had stirred when the rocks hit the water earlier. Now, as the noise and disruption escalated, they began to rise, slowly, methodically. I could see the faint ripples cutting across the surface of the pond in long, lazy arcs. I could hear the low, rumbling grunts that sounded almost comical if you didn't know better. But I knew better. Those sounds were not laughter. They were warnings. Warnings that were about to be ignored one last time. Karen's voice rose above the others, slurring slightly with drink but still loud enough to carry across the clearing. "Gather round, everyone. Midnight swim's about to begin. First one to the dock and back gets free dues for a year." A roar of approval answered her. People stripped off shirts, kicked off sandals, charged barefoot down the slope toward the pond, illuminated by the flickering orange glow of the bonfire and a few scattered flashlights. A herd of human arrogance stampeding toward a line they couldn't even see. I stayed on the steps, arms folded, a statue in the gathering darkness, watching, waiting. The moon rose slow and fat over the trees, casting a cold, silver light across the water. The no swimming signs flapped lazily in the night breeze, ignored as thoroughly as every warning that had come before. They thought they were invincible. They thought nature was something tamed and conquered. They thought my warnings were just the paranoid ramblings of a bitter old man. They were wrong. And by the time the first hippo broke the surface with a roar that shook the night air like thunder, it would be far, far too late for them to learn. Midnight struck like a hammer. The last seconds ticked away under a sky so full of stars, it looked like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. But the scene on the ground was anything but peaceful. Karen stood at the edge of the pond, tiara still perched drunkenly on her head, hoisting a half-empty wine bottle above her like it was a trophy. "To Willow Creek!" she bellowed, her voice slurring and cracking at the edges. "To community spirit!" A cheer erupted around her, wild and drunken, a chaos of whoops, clapping, and the unmistakable sound of beer cans cracking open. The crowd surged forward, a tide of laughing, stumbling humanity spilling down the slope toward the water. Kids raced ahead, kicking off sneakers, pulling off shirts, daring each other with shrieks and shrill giggles. Adults weren't far behind, stripping down to boxers and tank tops, sloshing through the muddy banks like it was some kind of drunken pilgrimage. I remained exactly where I was, seated on my porch steps, elbows resting on my knees, eyes cold and detached. I watched them run, scream, dive into the pond with reckless glee, utterly deaf to the slow drumbeat of doom rumbling beneath the surface. The first splash was loud, then another, then dozens more. Water churned as bodies hit it from every angle. Laughter echoed, bouncing off the trees like mockery. Somewhere near the fire pit, a Bluetooth speaker blasted some hideous pop song, the thudding bass vibrating through the soles of my boots. For a moment, it almost looked like a party. For a moment, they really believed they had won. And then Solomon surfaced. It happened so fast most of them didn't register it at first. A massive shape, dark and glistening, rose up from the center of the pond, with a sound like a drum exploding. Water cascaded off his back in sheets, and then his mouth opened, a yawning pink cavern wider than a pickup truck's tailgate, emitting a bellow so loud and deep it vibrated through the earth and into the bones of every living thing around him. The laughter faltered. A few people froze, water dripping from their hands and faces as they turned toward the monstrous silhouette now charging through the pond with terrifying speed. Gideon and Ruth erupted next, slicing through the water like torpedoes, their huge eyes locked onto the swarm of invaders. Miriam followed, slower but no less deadly, her massive bulk pushing up waves as she plowed forward with ancient, implacable rage. Then the screaming started. Not playful shrieks, not drunken whoops, real screams, high and broken and panicked. The water churned violently as the hippos closed in, jaws snapping at the air, sending geysers of foam and flailing limbs flying. A teenage boy who had been laughing minutes ago let out a shriek as Gideon surged toward him, the water around the kid exploding in white spray. He scrambled backward, tripping over another swimmer, dragging them both under for a terrifying second before they resurfaced, coughing and gasping. Karen stumbled back from the water's edge, her tiara tumbling off into the mud. "Stay calm," she screamed, waving her arms wildly. "Stay calm. They're just big animals. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Chaos tore through the camp like a wildfire. Tents collapsed as people tripped over stakes and guy lines. Coolers were upended, their contents spilling into the mud. Children sobbed. Mothers screamed their names. Men barked orders that no one listened to. The bonfire crackled, casting a hellish orange glow over the stampede. A woman sprinted past me, barefoot and soaked, clutching a toddler to her chest. Two grown men crashed into each other near the pond's edge, one slipping and disappearing under the water with a strangled yelp. Karen tried to rally her herd, but no one was listening. She stood frozen for a moment, looking small and pitiful under the harsh moonlight, before turning and bolting up the hill herself, slipping twice in the mud and going down hard on her hands and knees. I watched it all without moving, without blinking, a cold observer to the consequences they had summoned with their arrogance. The hippos weren't hunting. They weren't trying to kill. They were defending their territory with the ruthless efficiency evolution had baked into their bones for millions of years. And the trespassers were nothing more than intruders, in their eyes, loud, clumsy, disrespectful intruders. A loud wail drew my attention toward the driveway. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the night like a twisted holiday parade as two sheriff's cruisers pulled up, tires skidding in the loose gravel. Deputies poured out, hands on their holsters, scanning the madness with wide, disbelieving eyes. One of them spotted me sitting calmly on the steps and jogged over. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. I didn't bother standing. I just tilted my head toward the pond, where Solomon had finally stopped his charge and was floating lazily, nostrils flaring, his massive body casting a mountain-like shadow across the panicked campers clawing their way out of the water. "They trespassed," I said evenly. "Ignored the posted warnings. Ignored me. I told them not to swim. They thought they knew better." The deputy's mouth tightened into a grim line. He glanced at the warning signs, bold, clear, unmistakable, posted all around the property. He looked back at the chaos, and then he nodded. "Copy that." Within minutes, the sheriffs had cordoned off the scene, pulling shell-shocked campers out of the water, corralling dazed families into huddled groups near the tree line. Emergency responders arrived next, dragging shivering, bruised bodies into ambulances. Thankfully, miraculously, no one had been seriously hurt. A few close calls, a few minor bites, a few cracked ribs from the panic stampede, but no fatalities. The hippos, mercifully, had exercised more restraint than the humans deserved. I stayed seated through it all, a silent witness, while the deputies interviewed witness after witness, each one pointing fingers, spinning wild stories about how it wasn't their fault, how they didn't know, how they didn't see the signs. Karen, mud-smeared and wild-eyed, tried to bluff her way through it, claiming she had secured verbal permission for the event. When asked whose permission, she stammered, flailed, and finally collapsed into furious tears. The sheriff approached me near dawn, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He handed me a slip of paper, official confirmation that the entire event had been deemed unlawful trespass, and that I was fully within my rights to press charges if I chose. I folded the paper into my pocket without reading it. I didn't need revenge. Not now. They had punished themselves better than I ever could have. Word spread like wildfire over the next week. News crews showed up, swarming the entrance to the Willow Creek subdivision like vultures. Footage of Solomon's midnight roar, captured on a dozen drunken smartphones, played on every local news channel. Lawsuits rained down on the HOA like fire from heaven. Personal injury claims, negligence suits, trespass allegations. Families who once blindly followed Karen's every whim now turned on her with a vengeance, demanding restitution for their ruined vacations, their hospital bills, their shattered illusions of control. Karen tried to hold on, tried to rally her little empire, but the pressure broke her like a rotten branch. 2 weeks after the incident, she resigned in disgrace, her resignation letter dripping with bitterness and denial. She sold her house in a hurry, slashing the price by nearly a third just to get out before the neighborhood could finish what the Hippos had started. I heard she moved 2 counties over, started over in some HOA-free wasteland where no one knew her name. Good riddance. As for me, I rebuilt my fences, reposted my signs, cleaned up the debris they had left behind. The Hippos settled back into their routine as if nothing had happened, floating peacefully in the pond under the early morning mist, massive and serene and utterly indifferent to the foolishness of humans. And I sat once more on my porch, coffee in hand, boots planted firmly on the steps, watching the sun rise over my land, unchallenged, undisturbed, and finally, gloriously free again.